the stick to football thing only comes when they disagree with you a few. So it's an absurd thing, but no, I'm like anyone else. I'm interested in politics. I don't try and push people into areas, so if I give my views occasionally.
Is it easy being a professional footballer?
No, obviously not. I think people have got slightly confused with the job they're perhaps most like to do rather than what is the easiest. I can understand why they're confused, but the truth is, I suppose, compared with any other profession in the country, most children, probably more than any other job, would like to be footballers. Therefore, the fact that it's so difficult to get to the top in the first place suggests that it's certainly not easy. It's also, I think, important to mention that football is completely meritocratic. There's no paternal help. It's not a question of who you know rather than what you know. So it's unbelievably competitive. There are thousands and thousands of kids are at football club academies, and only a tiny percentage make it to the top. So that suggests to me it's actually probably one of the most difficult jobs in the world, certainly not the easiest. Maybe they're getting a little bit thinking about the salaries, which is always something that's aimed at football. Doesn't seem to apply to other sports. But maybe because most footballers are working class lads, I don't know. But I would argue football's case is certainly not easy by any stretch of the imagination.
I don't know. When did you first think you wanted to be a professional footballer, and how was it when you finally got there?
Well, it's a slow process. I think I thought about being a footballer be just about the time I started to walk, I'd imagine. But as soon as I kicked the ball around, so it was always part of my life. That or cricket, to be honest. I didn't know. I actually thought I had more chance at cricket than footballers, because cricket's easier than football. There's another one for it. But in the end, football's opportunity came along first, and it's magical. I still doubted myself whether I'd actually, make it to the very top. But whatever level I got to, I managed to still score a few goals. So, for me, I would say it's the easiest job in the world, because that's the job that I was given the gift of being able to do. But it's still hard. You train every day. I know it's not the hours of other jobs, but you have to train really hard. These are very young men. They have to give up a lifestyle in many ways that most teenagers and young men, or of course in their 20s, you can't go out partying all the time. Some do, but they usually pay for it in their careers somehow. So it's actually, it's not the wonderfully magnificent life it appears. If you get to the very top, obviously the rewards are astronomical, and that makes a big difference. But it wasn't like that in my day. It was a kind of gradual process, and in the end, I earned decent money, but it's obviously nothing compared to what it is now.
And in terms of, I was just looking down through this list of the other jobs they looked at: surgeon, nurse, firefighter, soldier, cleaner, chef, waiter, journalist. People think being a journalist is quite easy as well. What would you have done if it wasn't footballer?
Probably journalism. I was
Really?
I used to write my match reports when I used to go and watch Leicester at Filbert Street growing up. So I always thought, and I was always interested in the media. Obviously, that's where I am in the end anyway, as a kind of journalist in some form, broadcaster. So, I think I would have probably tried to do that, because I certainly didn't want to work with my dad on the market. It's way too hard work. So I think I would have wanted to be a sports journalist. Whether I'd have managed to or not, I don't know. But the fact that I played and scored a few goals for England certainly helped me get back into journalism after my football career.
And what about Prime Minister then? So this poll, 8 out of 10 thing, being a footballer is easier than being Prime Minister. Do you think it looks easy being Prime Minister by comparison?
I'm not sure. I think I would certainly say being a footballer is preferable to being Prime Minister. There's a distinct difference between what's easier, though. Yes, being a Prime Minister is an incredibly difficult job, and it's a job that's impossible to please all the people all of the time. So that in itself is obviously extremely difficult. But you get a hell of a big team around you, don't you? You've got a big cabinet, all these people helping you out. Somebody looks after culture and sport, and somebody else does education, and somebody does foreign affairs. I mean, what do? You pitch up once a week at Prime Minister's Questions for half an hour, and that's about it, really, isn't it?
I mean, I suspect there's some prime ministers would argue there's a bit more to that. Would you fancy the job?
Good Lord, no. just occasionally dabbling on Twitter in the political world is enough to put you off doing that. It's bad enough in football. That's incredibly tribal, but politics is even more tribal. But I'm interested in politics. I have been all my life, not all my life, but my adult life. But actually going into politics myself would never, no ambitions.
Some people, clearly, because you particularly on social media, you're quite political.
Yeah.
Have you ever been asked? Have you ever had anyone approach you and say, "Gary, have you thought about we've got a little safe seat here somewhere"?
No, I've never had that. I've asked him, obviously, political campaigns on numerous occasions, but no, I haven't.
And if they did, you don't fancy it?
No, I'd have to form a new party.
Oh, right, that's a good.
Yeah, centre forward party.
Centre forward, it's very good.
There you go.
Oh, so you have thought about this? You've got. I bet you've.
No, it was actually.
You've got the logo ready to go.
It was a friend of mine that tried to push me into politics, saying we can start a new party. You're going to lead it, and it's going to. It was in jest. I hasten to add.
Yeah. And in terms of when you're sort of being critical, I mean, there've been lots of being critical of recently, whether it's been Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson. Is there ever part of you that thinks, oh, it's a tough job, it's an impossible job?
Oh, no, it's a tough job. There's no question about that. And obviously, you've got to manage the budget and things like this, and everybody wants a slice of the pie. It must be incredibly difficult. And they've made it look incredibly difficult over the last the recent months.
And what about when you are being political? Because we've all got a view on politics because we all we all get to vote, but then people tell you stick to the football, Gary.
Yeah.
Whether it's you talking about politics in the UK or going to Qatar or whatever.
Yeah, it's invariably from a plumber or a taxi driver or an insurance broker or someone in the city who tweets about politics all the time. But I think the stick to football thing only comes when they disagree with your view. So it's an absurd thing, but no, I'm like anyone else. I'm interested in politics. I don't try and push people into areas or stuff. I give my views occasionally, and I enjoy politics. I mean, I've got podcast business now. We've got probably the biggest political podcast in the country, and the rest is politics, which is of great joy and pleasure. We try to get people, agreeing and to disagree agreeably and stuff like that, which I think is something that we could all try and do. It seems to get so tribal and aggressive nowadays and divisive, which is a great shame. You can enjoy politics without taking umbrage over everything.
Do you think we'd get better politicians if they were better paid? If they were paid like footballers are these days?
Well, it's a funny one. I mean, you probably never get that through Parliament, but I've always thought that actually. I mean, it's such an important job. That I've always thought that if we could kind of tempt the really brilliant minds in the country into the roles, rather than perhaps people that are already self-made or their family's fortune or they're just, not all of them, but obviously some come through the ranks. But I don't think we really, really entice the great minds in the country, and probably a bigger salary would, but I don't think you'd ever get that through. They'd probably vote for it themselves.
Well, there just seems this weird thing with, as a country, we moan about politicians, they're rubbish, and why are they better? And then we treat them really badly, in terms of the abuse they get online, the sort of the nitpicking, the double standards and all that sort of stuff. It's a wonder that, the cost-benefit ratio of the money versus the miserable time you get.
I'd absolutely concur. And I suppose it's, politicians affect people's lives all the time, and in a way, it's not similar, but it's not as strong in football. But footballers get, you have a bad game. I wouldn't dare go online if social media were around when I played. I'd do what I did when I played, which is like on a Monday morning I'd buy all the newspapers if I'd scored a couple at the weekend, and buy none of them at all if I'd had a stinker. And I think I'd do the same with social media. But I think, sports people, certainly footballers, because the fans care so much about it, that they can be very abusive towards their and certainly those of other clubs, as we've seen, in the same way that perhaps politicians are.
Yeah, they definitely seem to get it in the same way.
Yeah.
And what about your current? How are things at the BBC and your tweeting? Have you been ticked off about that lately? The new chairman seemed to be cross about it.
I think I've been a very good boy. I think
that's good.
Yes, yeah. Thank my end of year report was okay.
Listen, Gary, it's really good to speak to you. Thank you so much for making the case of professional footballers.
And it's a strong case, Matt. A strong case.
Gary Lineker, thanks for joining us on Times Radio.
My pleasure.